Welcome to Firsts in Fiction, your first stop for learning to write fantastic fiction. I'm your host, Aaron Gansky, author of The Bargain, The Hand of Adonai series, and Firsts in Fiction.
And I'm Alton Gansky, coming to you from the nearly destroyed areas of California because of the drought and pending legislation that's going to cost us $10,000 for using too much water. That's all the politics I'm going to get into. I am the author of a number of books, most recently a novella that's part of a series. It's written like a television program, and it's called The Girl, and it kind of looks like that. Again, novella this time, not usual novel length that I do, but it's kind of fun. It just came out. It's doing fine, and that's all I have to say about that.
And for a minute there, I thought we were doing primary politics.
No, no, I'm pretty apolitical here. I just read an article that there's maybe pending legislation which will affect you, Aaron, down there in the desert.
Yeah.
You get hit with a $10,000 fine if you use too much water. So
I'm excited about that. That is
well, but
good
you know,
news.
you're a teacher, so you're just rolling in the money. I know that.
That's right. I went into teaching for the money. Well, with us today, as you can hear laughing there in the background, is Heather Luby, kind of a blast from the past. She used to host a very sophisticated podcast called Firsts in Fiction, and then she left and everything just kind of went downhill. But she's back to join us tonight. And Heather, why don't you introduce yourself for us?
Well, I'm Heather Luby. I am a writer as well, mostly flash fiction stories. I have a novel not yet in print. I'm a teacher of the college level writing and workshops, and now the former editor of the Citron Review. I just left that helm, I guess, in November. So to free up some extra time for writing is the plan.
Absolutely, and we miss you at the Citron Review, and we miss you on First in Fiction. So we're excited to have you along to talk about writing for women. It may come as a surprise, but I am not a woman, and Pops, I don't think that you are. Is that correct?
No, I got a couple of pair of spectator pumps in the closet, but beyond that, no.
Okay, I want to make a Bruce Jenner joke, but I'm not sure if it's the time or place or if it's too soon. So
Too soon.
Too soon. So we'll move on here. I do want to give a special thanks and shout out. If you are listening on the audio version, you'll notice our intro music has changed dramatically. And so the little clip that you heard leading into this was from Eliza Rickman. Elizarickman, and she's just a fantastic artist. Discovered her by listening to the podcast Welcome to Night Vale. Immediately bought her album and asked her for permission to use her music for our podcast, which she said that's fine as long as we give her a shout out. So I'm giving her a shout out. Please check her out. She's got some incredible music. At the end of the show on the audio version, I'll play the entire song that you heard at the beginning, and I will put some links in the show notes to her sites, elizarickman.com or elizarickman.bandcamp.com, where you can support her and her music. And that's just a really exciting thing. So she's got some quality music, and I'd really encourage you guys to go check her out. So there's that. Thank you again, Eliza. And let's throw it back over to you, Pops, with our publishing term of the day.
Well, in publishing, you have this thing called an ARC. That's spelled A-R-C. That's really an initialism for advanced reader copy. And so when you write your book and the publisher has it, it's getting ready to come out, they will put out ARCs, advanced reader copies, to any number of people they have on their list, people who are readers in that particular genre. And they get first look at it. And the idea is to get them to say nice things about it that we can use in marketing. It also primes them a little bit for maybe putting reviews on Amazon or Barnes & Noble, that sort of thing, for the ebook versions of it. It is usually unproofed copy. That's one of the things you have to remember. In fact, most of them will say right on the cover that this is uncorrected copy. It's unedited copy. So it goes out with all the typos and stuff. But those people who get ARCs know that they don't really care. They're reading for content and those sorts of things. So that's something that most traditional publishers, legacy publishers, will do. Send out ARCs to advanced readers. Those now doing some self-publishing are starting to do the same kind of thing with readers, they'll try to build a network of 30 or 40 people they can send their soon-to-be-released book to, and then get feedback from that. And then some of them will say, well, you misspelled this word and stuff. So it's an extra level of proofing. So ARC, A-R-C.
That's a very timely topic because I just got my ARCs in for Hand of Adonai series. So I'm in the process of distributing those to my print beta readers, and it's an exciting process. You get to hold the book in your hand and kind of get a sense of what it's going to be like. And of course, like you say, it's unedited. The way Lighthouse does it is the book has been through several rounds of editing. Just hasn't been like this is one of the final steps in that editing process to see if there anything else has slipped through the crack. But it's also, like you say, to create a little bit of interest, maybe get a few reviews up on Amazon and find some people to say some nice things, which is tough when they're reading my stuff. It's really tough to find good things to say. So
you did bring up something interesting, that the way they send the ARCs out will vary from publisher to publisher. Sometimes they're bound like a book, and so it'll look like a trade paper book. And it will have a cheapo cover around it, and it'll be a perfect binding on the side and proper trim size and stuff. And then other times what they do is they send out what is pretty much page proofs, and it's just a collection of papers. So it depends on the publisher. They're not always the same, but you get a better feel for it if it is bound like a book. That also helps the publisher figure out the actual size of the book so they can finish their cover work and stuff like that for the spine, which is always tricky to do.
I just finished reading an ARC for one of our classmates from Antioch, Aaron.
Oh, who's that?
Do you remember Heather Gordon, by any chance? She was, I believe, the heliotrope, so you might have never met her.
Yeah, or if I did, it was right at the very end. The name is familiar.
Yeah, so she's from Canada, but she is publishing a book called Fireflies, Finding Light in a Dark World. It is also with a Christian publisher, though I'm blanking right now on the name. But they sent her ARC to me, I think, back in February or March, because I just finished up reading and getting some comments back to the publisher and some, marketing blurbs and such. It was a really great book. Whenever it comes out, you'll have to make sure you pick it up.
I'll have to do that, absolutely. Remind me, because I've got the memory, I've got a memory like a sieve, So I've got a mind like a steel trap. It snapped years ago. So, well, we are talking about writing for women today, and because we've got Mother's Day coming up, as my wife kindly reminds me subtly every day or so, every hour, that it's coming up this weekend, and so we thought we'd talk about writing not only about women but also for women. Now, your genre may not be specifically, maybe it's not a romance or an Amish mystery or whatever it is that you think women are reading, but what we know from statistics is that women read, and they read a lot. They read a lot more than men do, generally speaking, and it's not. They seem to be a lot more willing to read outside of genres. And so they'll read mysteries, they'll read romances, they'll read action and adventures, fantasy, sci-fi. So their tastes vary. So even if you don't think you're writing for women, there's a very good chance that a woman is reading your book. And because of that, you want to make sure that you're doing a good job of portraying them. Now, obviously, if you're a woman, you're probably doing a pretty spectacular job. But if you are unfortunate, like my father and I, to have that Y chromosome, guys have the Y chromosome, right?
Yes, we are Y chromosome hindered. That's right.
Whew. Okay, so if you've got that Y chromosome, you end up forgetting which chromosomes you have and saying stupid things and embarrassing yourself on big podcasts like this. So we brought in Heather to help us out, and so she's got some good advice. So Heather, I'm going to toss it over to you. What should we keep in mind as we are writing for women and specifically about women?
Well, I think that you started off hitting the nail on the head. That I think that there are some misconceptions that women are only reading certain types of fiction. It is true, of course, that romance novels are highly popular. There was for a while the label of chick lit or women's fiction that sort of gets floated around. But you're right, statistics will tell us that women read everything, and they read widely. So it doesn't matter, like you said, if it's sci-fi or horror or romance. If you are looking for a readership, the readership that you as an author are trying to capture is most likely that of a woman, because men do not anywhere near, statistically numbers-wise, read as much fiction as women. So if you are a writer and you're wanting readers, then you need to be thinking about those readers being women. And I think that, you know, one of the important things that when you start thinking about how to portray women, and I don't care if you're a female writer or a male writer, is it's really easy to fall into cliche and stereotype because they have been present in fiction before. They're the first things that pop into our head when we come up with ideas, and our first instinct is to write maybe a character a certain way because it has become cliche. I want to encourage people to fight that instinct and instead, you know, break out of some of these cliched stereotypes that we put women into. For instance, you know, the doting or perfect mother, for instance. I don't know if you've ever come across this before, Aaron.
Yeah, I mean, it's, you know, the mother that's too good to be true, that just loves her kids and will do anything for them. And I think we all like to think of ourselves as parents that are that way, but then you have 3 children and you learn very quickly that you do not have the unlimited well of patience. And so I think pulling, you know, one thing that's interesting is to take some of these cliches and pull them back a little bit, kind of dig a little bit deeper, and where do these characters, if they are the, you know, quote-unquote doting or perfect mother, in what ways do they fail at that? And it's just like any character that you have. You don't want them to be cliche or stereotype, and whether it's a man or a woman. You want to dig a little bit deeper and find how they're different than the stereotypes or cliches. I'll throw this out there real quick, and it's not in our show notes, so I'm going off the cuff here a little bit. But Fitzgerald was once asked how he wrote so adequately or so specifically about these, like it's at the flappers, the whole fashion thing, flappers in the 20s, how he basically created that, and how he did that. And he says, well, I didn't write to create a stereotype. I wrote a specific character, and that character became popular, and hence the stereotype came from that individual character. But the character themselves was not a part of that flapper movement or that fashion trend or anything like that. It was just how this one particular character dressed, and that became very much a fashion symbol, largely based on the popularity of his novels. So you can do a lot more describing an individual than you can trying to have one character represent an entire, you know, stereotype, an entire gender in a lot of ways.
Well, I think that's just it. It's concentrating on who that character is, not thinking about them in terms of being a concept you're trying to fulfill, that you are creating a character to fill a concept or an idea that you have, but they are letting that character be who they are on their own terms as an individual. And personally, you know, this idea of having a perfect anything to me is sort of boring. I mean, I'm not really interested in perfect characters. And I think sometimes, you know, people fall into this cliche if they're a little nervous about writing female characters, for instance, because they think that somehow having a flawless character makes them strong, or they're feeling that they're playing safe by creating them without any flaws because they don't want to offend anyone. But to me, I mean, that's not interesting. Every character is also an individual. Like I said, they're not some idea, they're not some concept that you're trying to write.
I agree. I've heard that a lot. I've listened to a lot of Marvel podcasts, and I would love to just spend this entire time talking about Avengers too, but I don't want to derail us. All right. Oh, so excited. Anyhow, but all these podcasts I listen to, especially the writing ones and the ones about Marvel, keep talking about strong female characters. Strong female characters. This is what we love about Marvel, strong female characters. And I want to say, you know what? They're strong characters. The gender, not as important. But I think the people's thirst and desire for the quote-unquote strong female character is the fact that we don't see a lot of them. And I know one of the things that I fall into is, you know, in avoiding the damsel in distress kind of, you know, cliche.
Oh, which is the worst. Which is the worst.
You know, where they just break down in tears for no reason at all, and you're getting hysterical, and you just smack them across the face to get them back in line. Like, it's so bad. But in the in the interest of avoiding that, you end up going to the other side and making them completely unrelatable because they become this, crazy kind of, I can't even think of a polite term to say, but.
But you're right. The pendulum swings back the other direction. That if they become afraid of presenting them, instead of being a damsel in distress who is really only serving the purpose of being rescued by a man, her entire purpose in a movie or a comic book or in a book is to just serve as a plot device for the male character to demonstrate who he is, and they need to be rescued. As opposed to try to avoid that, what a lot of writers tend to do is they tend to make the woman, in order to portray her as strong, they give her just sort of like all male characteristics, as if also making her feminine in some way is synonymous with weak. So what we do is we make a man that has breasts and call it a strong female character, which isn't exactly what we should be going for either.
Yeah, men with breasts often can make things more awkward than anything else. But you're right. The characteristics, they just tend to transpose them and put them into a female body. I guess one thing that we can think of is if you could take the character out, the woman character out, and replace it with some sort of precious artifact, and Indiana Jones is trying to save the precious artifact, well, I mean, then she's a plot device. She's a prop more than she is a character, and that can be problematic. Instead, she should have some active role in the plot, should have some impact on the plot rather than just being along for the ride. And that's one thing I think where we could really develop our female characters is letting them do things and letting them be, strong characters that are memorable, not necessarily manly, but competent and confident. I think a lot of that stems from the confidence that your character should have.
And with their own motivations, right? That I love this idea of if you could replace her with an artifact, if you could replace her with an object, and that works somehow, then that should be a huge red flag. So I'm going to have to remember that and use that in the future, especially when I'm teaching. Because that's what we do, is we have to make sure that the female characters, if we want them to be strong, if we want them to be relatable, is that we have to give them their own sense of agency, their own motivations. And this doesn't really matter if they're a protagonist, if they're a secondary character. If you're going to put them in the book, they should exist for themselves and not solely for the purpose of another character.
Absolutely. Now I want to throw it back over to you, Pops, real quick, because I've got a couple questions. One question that I want to get into, it's going to be a little bit longer though, so we'll go to that second. But I'll say it now so you guys can think about it. Is what do we tell our writing audience to do to avoid these cliches and stereotypes? How do you separate your what practical tips can we give our audience to avoid falling into these cliches and stereotypes? But one of the interesting things, Pops, that you've talked about on the show before, and I think it's super relevant now, is that you had a character who was a male that you actually changed to a female in a ship possessed. And you've mentioned it before, but if you just real quick again kind of mention your motivation in that and what it actually did for your plot and why this character worked better as a woman than as a man.
Yeah, there was a ship possessed a long time ago. Zondervan Publishers put that out. I discovered it in the writing. It was more a sensation, more feel than it was premeditation. But I was moving along, and I think I was maybe 50, 80 pages into the thing. So not real far, but far enough to know that things weren't working. I couldn't get my protagonist to feel right, to act right. What I had done is my protagonist was a retired Navy captain who keeps getting called back into service, which he hates. He doesn't want to do that. He just wants to teach, but he keeps getting called back in. He has no say in the matter. And helping him was a ensign who was assigned to him, a Navy ensign, and I had him as a male. It was Ensign Wilcox. And I'm partway through this, and they discover this mysterious submarine from World War II that comes back 50 years late without its crew, but it did not come back alone. And the dynamic wasn't there. I could just tell I was off pace. And I finally realized that the problem was that we needed a woman, a strong character. And by strong, I don't mean she's going to be throwing her punches every place, but who was sharp, had problems, just like everyone else does. All the protagonists and stuff, they have their own set of problems. So she had her baggage to bring in, but she also very bright and can bring something to it. Once I did that, I went back and rewrote the scenes with the ensign as a female. All of a sudden, my character came more to life. The dialogue was better. The sense of danger was better. And one of the things I was doing there is I was playing the idea is that he's retired. So while he's not an old man, he is an older man. You know, he's middle-aged. She's an ensign, so she's going to be in her let's see, she has to be through college and stuff. So she's going to be in her early 20s with that. So I wanted to play on some of the emotions that it's natural for a man of that age to want to be fatherly to a woman that age, and there's nothing he can do about it. He's kind of old school on that. Of course, she's more independent, and that gave me some new dynamics to work with, which I didn't have when it was two guys, because the captain would tell the ensign, shut up, go do it, and that's it. You know, there's not going to be any kind of bonding, any kind of connection going on there. Once I made the ensign a woman, I now had emotional dynamics that I didn't have before. Not because all women are emotional, but because the man is emotional too, and he's going to develop certain emotional ties. When I start talking about love here, I'm just talking about their upbringing is going to come to the forefront. And that's why I did it, and it's the only reason the book worked. So I started off on the wrong foot, but fortunately I realized it early.
Well, I think the book works for several reasons, but that definitely was one of them. So the change there really changed the character dynamics, and it gave, I don't want to say a foil to your protagonist, but in some ways perhaps a bit of a foil, a character foil, somebody who's kind of the opposite characteristics, and it gives you create a character foil for the sake of contrast. And so what you've done what you did by switching the man to a woman is we saw a new aspect of your protagonist that we would not have seen otherwise. But she's also more than just the object. She's more than just, you know, she played a part in the plot. She helped move the plot along. And like you say, it was that dynamic, that relationship that really came alive and helped us to understand your protagonist a little bit better. But I think we would be leading our listenership astray if we said that women characters exist only for us to better understand our protagonists. That's not the impression that we're trying to leave them here, but we're trying to say giving characters a chance to interact with women. Giving male characters a chance to interact with women tells us a lot about the male characters. It also tells us a lot about the female characters. So having that kind of those opposites there really kind of helps increase the tension and help reveal those characters.
Yeah, I'm not saying that you have a woman character so you can explore those aspects in a male protagonist. She's one of the protagonists. She's a supporting protagonist. But as soon as you introduce something like that, then it opens up some doors that I couldn't go through before. I was able to look into and portray the male psyche and some of the things a man of that age in a dangerous situation would feel that I couldn't do without that. At the same time, because I have some point of view scenes from her point of view, I had to try to determine how she, a Navy ensign, female Navy ensign, would respond to situations and like that. And it just brought a lot richer texture to the story.
Absolutely, and that's I think one of the things that you did right is that you intentionally made her a woman for more than just the fact of having a woman in the book. I don't know if you've ever read the book where you've got the token woman, where the author sits down to read the book and starts writing and realizes his entire cast of characters is all male, and then, I better have a female in here, so you just throw one in. It doesn't always work.
Yeah, that's interesting. I just finished reading I, Asimov, which is an autobiography of Isaac Asimov. He did a very long one, which is done in 2 parts, 2 volumes. This was a topical one that he did that his wife made him do as he was getting close to the end of life. And when he talks about his early works, he talks about being old science fiction, the way it started. And so it was optimistic. Technology was part of the story, but he said, I almost never had women in it. And at some point he realized that. This is not his short stories we're talking about, not his later novels, but early on. So this would have been in the 30s. And so he's writing for magazines and writing these, and it occurred to him, oddly enough, quite late, that he had not been putting women in it. And he later changes that once he became aware of that faux pas. And I think that added to his writing. But it was interesting, he just never thought of it.
I think it's interesting. I don't think that you, I agree with you, Aaron, that I don't like to see the token woman, but in the same sense that I probably wouldn't want to see a token man. I like that, Alton, you said you added a female character who I think served the purpose of developing the plot of your novel. And it happened to be that a female did that job best for you, but that she, of course, had her own motivations, her own agency. I like that you made her someone other than a love interest. It probably would have been fine if she was a love interest as well, in a different type of book, of course, but as long as she had, again, her own individual agencies and motivations. But I do like that you created a female character that was help driving your plot, helping develop both of your characters, and you did it without making her a love interest, which I have to say, as a female reader, I probably would have really enjoyed that aspect.
And in those books, he's married, and the wife never has a point of view scene. We never see her. She's only talked about. So I keep her at arm's distance with that. But the way he talks about her shows that she's a very strong and bright woman. And that was half the fun of that, because he keeps getting called back to duty, and he doesn't like it, and his wife doesn't like it. And he gets called away from the Thanksgiving table. And he looks at the guy that had to deliver the message and brought his uniform to him. This was a separate one, and he studies the guy for a while, and the guy asks what he's looking for. He says, "You don't look too battered. You got this for my wife?" Yeah, it looks like you got away pretty quick. And then the idea was that she probably would have torn him apart with that. But he said, "Oh, no, she was very gracious with me," which then just upsets him even more.
Absolutely. So, go ahead.
I was just saying, this is an interesting conversation for me to have, because I've only recently been working on a longer piece with a female protagonist. Because, Aaron, you're familiar with my work. And with the exception, I think, of one flash fiction piece, I have only ever written male protagonists. I've always had pieces, especially some of my longer work, that has female characters. I like to think strong female characters that are integral to the plot, but my main characters have always been men. And I think it's, even though I'm a woman, I think it's probably something even I struggle with, is finding what I think is the right balance. What are these do's and don'ts? What should I be avoiding? What should I be trying to do? Because sometimes it feels a little hard to navigate, which I think sort of touched on the question that you were sort of posing to your dad earlier.
Right. Yeah. The how to make it, the practical tips for including women in fiction. Well, one of the first things I've read by you, the first story I ever read that you submitted was to Antioch, and we were in that workshop group together, and it was, if I remember correctly, the woman whose marriage was falling apart, and she went off to some sort of like spa kind of a thing. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and one of the things I really liked about that is she met another woman whose life was in similar upheaval, but she handled it very, very differently. And they formed this friendship, and this friendship is really what helped her kind of process what information she needed to process and gain some new perspective on her life, etc. But I think that's an important thing to remember. Somewhat what we talked about with Pops, with you changing the ensign from a male to a female, we got to see the male-female dynamic. We talked about how that female-male dynamic can add some tension. But I think it's important to remember, and I'm talking to myself here more than anything, is that our female characters need other females to talk to and to relate to. Our male characters need other males to relate to. We don't really understand a character fully until we see how they treat men and women, both separately and together. Like, put them in a situation where there are multiple women, put them in a situation where there are multiple men. How do they conduct themselves? How do they behave? And what does this reveal about our characters? So there's a certain type of I think, a relationship, a friendship that can develop our characters that we can only see when we're looking at, two of the same gender, two men or two females, and looking at them from that perspective. So one thing that I would say for our listeners is to, if you're including a female character and you only have the one, throw another one in there. Find another way. Give them a friend to talk to, something like that, and that's going to help us understand your character a little bit better.
I would say absolutely. In order to sort of make them an individual with their own agencies and motivation, you need to have a female character that interacts with other female characters at some point and let them discuss something that isn't about a male character. I think that I've read this before when it comes to movies, right? And I think I'm going to say the name wrong, but they call it like the Bechdel test or something, of whether or not a movie is representing women in a positive manner. And one of the ways in which they do this is that they go scene by scene through a movie and they count, how many scenes in the movie is a woman in where she is acting or speaking in a way that isn't directly related to a male character, which I find is sort of interesting, that we allow females to exist on their own terms, that their purpose that they're serving isn't only that of how do I exist only in relation to the male that is in the book, so that we allow them to interact with other women and to have conversations that aren't solely about whoever the male characters might be. Which Absolutely. I think would be that's a pretty low bar. It should be a fairly easy thing to do.
Right, exactly. Because, I mean, if their sole purpose just revolves around a male protagonist, then they cease to be their own character. And if the only time you see them, they're talking about that male character, then in some ways they're still just an auxiliary character supporting that protagonist, and they fail to be their own character. And while people do get fixated on other people, it's not the only thing that they ever think about. And if your plot, is only one character thinking about another character, what else is happening in the story? Like, there's going to be some other source of conflict or tension. What we're talking about here, having females hold their own, be their own characters, one of the ways you do that is by giving them, like you say, their own agency and motivation, but their own conflict. They've got to have their own conflict as well. And try and make it a conflict that's not necessarily tied directly to a male protagonist. It can be something at their job, or it can be, I don't know, maybe their life is on the line. Maybe they're being threatened in some way. I don't know, but find something, put something on the line for them. Give them some stakes. Something, well, not like fry up a steak, but like something that should be at stake.
Oh,
yeah. Okay.
Oh man, I was going with that. I was saying.
So give Heather and Pops a stake, but your characters make sure that they stand to lose something. Something needs to be on the line, and I think it should be something other than just a relationship with a male character. Yeah, they definitely have to be their own person.
Whether it's internal or external motivation, like you said, whether it's something at stake within themselves or some external thing that is at stake for them, it does need to exist on its own terms. And this is not to say, I mean, I think that you can have this exist even in a romance novel. I mean, I don't think this is something that is standalone only to even one genre or something. I think this is something that can exist in any novel, in any circumstance. I mean, look at you, Aaron. You're a happily married man, right? You work hard. You dedicate a large portion of your life to your family, to your wife, to your children. Mm-hmm. But not every conversation that you have in any given day and everything that might matter to you in any given day is focused solely on them. They're a huge part of that. But it's easy to assume that our characters in our books can have multiple things going on at one time. And when we don't do that, we miss these really great opportunities to develop their character. If the only thing they're ever focused on is one singular thing, it's very tunnel vision. we miss all these other small opportunities to allow our characters to interact with other people, to have other things at stake of which they are striving for or fighting against, that help show the reader who they are as an individual, that develop them as a character.
The world is wide, the conflicts are many, and if we go back to the topic of my wonderful wife, who's the closest thing to perfection that there is on this planet.
Is she in the room with you?
She's actually not, but I'm going to make her listen to this podcast for that reason. I love my wife, and I see her for maybe 3 or 4 hours a week these days because she's going to school, she's working full time, and she's just really, really busy. She's gearing up to go to Haiti as part of her college plan, where she's getting her master's in education, and she's going to go do some work in education down in Haiti. She's got to get her passport. So even just this afternoon, she was home. But the only thing I just saw the back of her running from room to room, working on computers, fixing this, telling the children to do that. Like, I don't even know if we talked for more than 30 seconds today. She's not thinking about me these days. I love her to death, but she hardly notices that I'm around, and she's got her own life. The world is wide. The conflicts are many. And so if all she ever did was talk about me, that would be problematic. That would be very problematic. She would cease to be, I think, a real character. I'll throw this out there. I was at the Orange County Christian Writers Conference a couple weekends ago. I had an opportunity to sit down and talk with some cool writers, some really great writers, and one of the ideas that somebody shared with me was about a group of women who kind of have their own little Bible study, and they each have their own marriages and different problems in their marriages, but they all came together and they talked like adults, like friends. They shared their burdens with each other, and it was kind of like a cool aspect that you're going to get multiple women, but you're going to also have the male characters around them, and you're going to be able to see these characters for who they truly are, and they're not always talking about their husbands. They're talking about other things in their life as well. So it sounded like a really cool concept to see like a friendship on that level. Not everything has to be like that, but if you could have a scene or two where you've got your characters interacting with other females, it's going to be good for you. It can only help.
Absolutely.
So what else can we do to make our females to shy away from the cliche stereotypes? What steps do you take to ensure that your characters are going to be real and memorable and unique?
One of the first ways for me is to actually use real women as examples. As opposed to even looking toward other novels or film or anything else like that. It's not really hard to look around the world around you. Look at the women that are in your life and the different roles they play and their different personalities. And I'm not saying base one of your characters, completely off of your neighbor, but you can patchwork. You can steal a little here, you can steal a little there, and put these traits together. But by looking at the people around you in their real lives and the things that they're tackling, you get closer to finding that authentic representation of what a woman would be like than you'll find if you're just looking at other sources of media that might be clouding our vision of what women are really like.
Right. Exactly. You gotta find where you're pulling your examples from. You gotta consider the source in a lot of ways. Yeah. Pulling examples from a Dirk Pitt novel may not be the direction that we want to go. So, Pops, what do you do with your characters when you're trying to make them unique and avoid those stereotypes?
Well, the first thing I do is I try to recognize that we do tend towards stereotypes, and the reason is men have not lived as women, women have not lived as men, and so we start making assumptions about the opposite gender. When you go to med school, you have to go through a class called gross anatomy, and that's where you dissect a human cadaver, and they will often insist that you dissect a cadaver that's the opposite gender from yours. So if you're a male doctor, you're going to dissect a female cadaver, and if you're a female doctor, you're going to dissect a male. And the idea is to focus on the physical differences all the way around from the heart to the obvious. with that and learn from that. So what I try to do is I try to observe women, and initially, and I've had several books in which the woman was the main protagonist. She's the hero. I've done several series like that. But I've always tried to have a chain of women that can read it. My wife, first of all, to make sure I'm not making dumb mistakes. And then first time I did this, my editor was a woman. The secondary editor, the line editor, was a woman. So there were several women that read through it. I was surprised how few things I had to change. But then I did get a few where I could see them shaking their head. Going, no, you poor Y chromosome crippled man, you. That would never be said, never happen, and that situation wouldn't occur. So I have to go back and rewrite the scene. You do that a few times, you start getting a feel for it. But then again, I also acknowledge that not all women are the same, as it's stated here. So you're going to find some that are very strong, very boisterous. My mother was frightening, incredibly strong. Someone tried to break into the house when I was a kid, tried to crawl through the window, and she took a bat to him. He never made it into the house. In fact, he didn't leave the property conscious. She scared me. She was strong in personality and physically because she'd had really a rough life. But then again, there are women who are very soft-spoken, timid, retiring, mousy, as it were. Now you can say the same thing about men. I've seen that same kind of spread of characteristics in men. So I'm not sure that there's that big a difference, except how they relate to one another. The way women relate to women is different than the way men relate to women, and vice versa. And so some of that took a little learning on my part. For me, the most difficult part was learning the terms and the clothing that women talk about. I now know what a spectator pump is. I know all the different kinds of shoes women wear, but that's only because my wife took me to the mall and made me walk through a woman's shoe store. And she started identifying, and she gave me a crash course. And that took quite a bit. And then occasionally one of my women readers would write back in the editing process and say, no, they'd never wear that together. Okay, well, I'm dumb as a brick on some of those things, but I learned. It went along. But it's no different than you writing male that's in some profession you don't know very well. And so you would have to learn what they're like. So
I have to say, in the first novel that I wrote with a male protagonist, I did much the same thing. I think beta readers are really important. I think that even if I'm a woman, I would probably have other women read my book if I had a female character. Just as when I wrote a male character, I asked other men to read my book because I needed to know, was I presenting things correctly, accurately, in a way that was relatable to a male reader. And much like you, I felt like I did a pretty good job, though letting my husband read it first, and then my agent is a man. One of my first readers, which was one of my mentors at Antioch, was also a man. It was very helpful to have each of them read it as well and see what they would catch that I might have slightly wrong. Just because, again, I'm not a man. There are just certain things that I might perceive in a certain way that I got wrong, that they helped me correct. But I think that that's the advice I would give to any writer, is that if you are writing a particular gender, is look for beta readers of that gender to sort of help make sure that how you're presenting the character, if you have good readers you trust, is authentic, that it's working.
So I'm hearing a couple things. I'm hearing, first of all, beta readers, and I think an important point is both of you mentioned spouses reading before it goes out to anybody else. Have somebody close, have a good friend, a spouse if you've got one, so anybody who's willing to read that can be that close beta reader for you. I'm also hearing that human dissection is a good process to go through. So we advocate human dissection.
If you're the one doing the dissecting, yeah.
Oh, is that the way it works?
Yeah.
Oh, well, okay.
You don't want to be on the table.
Sounds like somebody who's been on the table. And it's The Walking Dead all of a sudden. So, excellent. Yeah, all good points. Having some good beta readers and to do that, and focusing on some of those minutiae, some of the differences as well. Very good. I like to think about my characters' past histories. I like to think of their first loves and what transpired there, and what kind of emotional scarring they have, what has happened off of the page that is affecting my character on the page currently. I find that in my writing, I will always default to stereotypes if I don't take those steps. And so I need to stop and think, okay, my character is X amount of years old. They've had, so many things happen to them. What are these particular things? One of the things that I really want to stress is, what is that old saying? Heather's probably going to, you can correct me, this is why I like having you on here. Every unhappy family is unhappy in their own way, something like that.
Oh, sure. Is it the beginning of Anna Karenina, maybe? That it's like every happy family is happy in the same way, but every unhappy family is like unhappy in its own way. And again,
Yeah.
I butchered the line as well, but I know that that's the gist of the comment.
Yeah, and so the idea is, anytime I'm reading somebody's work where they've got, drunken father beating the children, or drunken husband beating the wife, and this and that, it sounds really weird to say, but it's like, okay, so this guy is standard drunk A. Let's find a way to make them really different. Like, how can they be uniquely horrible? Avoid the easy horrible things, and let's go to some other particular thing. What's the worst thing your character has ever said? What's the biggest regret that they hold on to? What has happened again off the page that's affecting your character on the page now? That's one of the things that I really want to focus on, to kind of develop my characters and remember that they're real people. They've already lived a full life, or depending on how old they are, they've already lived decades at least, and how does that affect them where they are currently? So that's one thing that I like to do with my writing. Any other advice?
Well, I'll add something really quick to that, just because you made me think. When I was just at AWP, and I was sitting on a panel that actually had to do with violence, but Richard Bausch was talking, and he made a point of pointing out that he wasn't all that concerned about violence in terms of writing the violence. He was always more concerned on what came after. He wasn't concerned about the drunk driver who had the car accident, who hit someone. He wanted to see that drunk driver on the ground in front of the car, piecing back the little pieces of glass to the headlight, right? Something like that. So when you were saying, if you have a character that might be engaging in some type of activity, or in themselves in the way that you're writing them steers somewhere close to stereotype or cliche, finding instead the small details that make them unique, that might subvert what your reader is expecting, that might shift the focus ever so slightly, those will be the things that make those characters come alive on the page, even if they're in a role that might somewhat be familiar. For instance, like an alcoholic parent or something like that. Mm-hmm. We know from reading submissions at Citron that you tend to see sometimes, a lot of the same types of stories. And I always want to tell submitters, it's not that these stories can't work. It's just that you've got the focus. You've got to shift your focus.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Pops, you have any last minute comments here before we go to reader comments? Or listener comments? Reader comments. How about that?
No, I just want to throw out for those who might be listening that may not know some of the terms we're using. A beta reader is somebody who reads the first draft, or there might be a second draft, but it's the first real reading by outsiders on it. And they're usually friends or other writers. So when we say beta, it's like alpha, beta, gamma, because it's a second level of readers. And it's very useful. And it really comes from the computer. We're back to doing terms again, I guess. It's really from the computer industry, because there's when they do apps and programs, you never got to see them until they went into beta testing. So the alpha was in-house, the beta was outside the house. So that's basically the same thing. So if the term is new to you, beta reader is sort of the second level of reading for the book. There's a lot of things you can do is off of television, and but be careful with it. So, for example, if you go see the Avengers, you see some strong women, but they're probably not overly realistic. But then again, none of them are. That's the beauty of the show. But for example, in the Murdoch Mysteries, if you ever get a chance to see those, you get the early seasons on Netflix. The female character plays the role of Dr. Ogden, and she is the not the mortician. She's the coroner. And this is in Toronto, Canada, and in the turn of the century. So it's right before 1900 when women couldn't do that. So they did a fabulous job in blending a woman of that time with a modern woman. So when you see her, she wears a bustle and has the long dress and the flowery hat and just the right kind of makeup, and she's very prim and proper, especially when men are around, but she's often the smartest one in the room, and she doesn't back down off those opinions, and that's what makes her infinitely more interesting, is that she is a couple of steps ahead of what we expect her to be in that setting and in that timeline. And I think that makes for some of the most interesting women, that they can be powerful or they can be weak, they can be just like any other character, really. Same thing with the men. But that's what makes them interesting, if they're a couple of steps off what we expect.
Good. Yeah, just one or two things that are going to separate them from the rest of the pack, the unique things. That's what our readers end up remembering, are those unique qualities of our characters. Absolutely. So we've got a few comments here. Molly Jo says she reads a lot of books and almost none are romance novels, so that's kind of helps our point out. Quotidian Light says she's missed Heather Luby, so yes, we've missed you as well. I'm going to secretly try to talk her into joining us more often.
This is my first 2015 podcast. I haven't been here at all this year.
I know, you've been too busy. It's that writing lifestyle. So. Molly Jo mentions she likes writing flawed characters because she enjoys seeing them overcome something or many things. Testa Groot likes our analogy of the woman equals object. If you can swap it out with the precious artifact, then we've probably got problems. And let's see. Oh, Molly Jo bought A Ship Possessed Pops, so she's going to read that next week after she's done reading the advanced copy of
May her tribe increase. May her tribe increase. Or not increase. Whatever's a blessing to her. I don't know.
I actually told her to get that book, but she's got to read Hand of Adonai first, so she's one of my beta readers. So the Bechdel test. Tess the Groot has helped us out there. The Bechdel test is what it's called, and English teachers use it to judge stories.
Yes.
I thought you'd said Bechdel tests.
Yeah, I think I did, though I might have still pronounced it slightly wrong, but that's exactly what I was talking about, yes.
Excellent. And then she takes exception to my little dig at Dirk Pitt, so apparently that's off the table. I guess I should go back to insulting Twilight. So let's see, and that should be about it, other than Becky Lindsay joined us, and she likes the advice about beta readers, and so does Testa Groot. So that's what we got. So
should we do a quick... Oh, as you say, should we do a quick rundown? I was looking at the outline that we had talked about earlier today. Should we just do a quick rundown, just really quick, of the bullet points, just to repeat the the couple of items?
Yeah, we can do that, absolutely. So you want me to do that?
Sure. I mean, I can as well, but I thought it might just be good before we wrap up to kind of remind everybody, because this has been a nice conversation. What are some of the high points of what we've talked about?
And since we went through the process of actually creating this outline together, then I think I'll actually post this on the show notes too as well, so people can access that. If you don't write everything down, you can always go back to aarongansky.com, #shamelessplug, and pull up the show notes there. But basically, we mentioned that women read outside of their genre. They do a lot of reading. And you want to avoid the cliches and stereotypes, such as the doting or the perfect mother, the innocent grandmother, the crazy feminist. That's one we didn't really talk about, but a lot of times people talk about strong women characters, in quotes, and that means the crazy feminist, and that's not always the case. You can be a strong woman without being a crazy feminist. The damsel in distress, which we said has been definitely played out, or the shrewish or the nagging wife that exists only to make the
badger some poor husband.
Yeah. Though I've got to say, my favorite example of that, and you want to talk about stepping a little bit out of the ordinary, The Devil and Tom Walker. Is it Devil and Tom Walker? Washington Irving. Pretty sure it's Devil and Tom Walker, where his wife is she abuses him. She physically abuses him. I just think that's fantastic. Like, they get into fights and she wins, and so he meets the devil. I'm summarizing here. I'm sorry. He meets the devil, and the devil says, you know, I'll give you all these riches if you give me your soul. And he's like, I've got to think about it. And he goes home and he tells his wife, and his wife says, what? Well, you sold your soul, didn't you? Like, let's get that money. And so he decides that just to tick her off, he's not going to sell his soul to Satan. He would ordinarily, but because she wants him to, he's not going to do it just
to be contrary.
her. So she goes out to sell her soul to Satan and doesn't come home for a while. So he, you know, a few days later goes out looking for her and finds out that she got into it with the devil and apparently gave the devil a run for his money. I just love that. She fought the devil and gave him a run for his money. So anyhow, that's taking a few extra steps outside of the cliches and the stereotypes. So we mentioned that it's good to start with real women that you know. Again, you don't want to do a one-for-one match, but take elements, kind of the patchwork quilt approach. Make her relevant to the plot. She's got to be relevant to the plot. Avoid the token woman. Give her other women to interact with. That's a big one. Make sure she's got some friends. Try changing a male character to a female character. See if that helps out or changes the dynamic in any way or adds some more tension. Make them matter. They've got to have their own motivations. They've got to have their own conflicts. Got to have something else they've got to overcome. Make them relatable. So in order for us to care about them, they have to stand to lose something. So again, it goes back to this idea of motivation, having some stakes. They've got to have something on the line that they stand to lose, and that's going to make us more interested in seeing them overcome their conflicts. And then lastly, you've got to make sure that they're more than just a love interest. So
I actually read. Sorry,
Go ahead.
I'm stepping over you, Aaron.
No, it's fine.
I get so excited. I was going to say, the last comment I wanted to make was that one of the bits of reading that I was doing before this podcast was on a website. It was a blog post called On Writing Strong Female Characters. It was by a gentleman named Daniel Swenson, and he had what I thought was a really great quote at the end of the blog post that I wanted to share at the end here, which was that he said, in short, if you want to write good characters, then start with character, not with gender. Write human beings, not stereotypes or sex objects. It's not rocket science.
That's a good point. I guess that's one thing we didn't touch on. Maybe I should find a different way of saying that. We didn't touch on the sex object. That's okay. Well,
I'm just going to sit here and watch you try to back out of this here.
Enjoy the show. Yes.
Yeah,
that's what I meant when I said love interest. They have to be more than a love interest or a sex object. How about that?
There you go. You covered it right there. Let's not make them just love interests or sexual objects, right? Yeah.
There you go.
But I like this idea of start with character, not with gender. Right? Make them a human being.
Absolutely. I completely agree with that. Yeah, absolutely. Oh, all right. Well, we had a great cast. So before we sign off, Pops, how can people get in touch with you?
Well, altongansky.com is still the best way. I've been pretty tied up with my writers' conference, which starts in a couple of weeks. So middle of May, I'll be on the East Coast. As it turns out, so will you. And we'll be afflicting the writers out there for a while, and then I get my life back.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to try and do a special podcast out there while we're out there. So
that'd be fun if we could pull that off. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And Heather, how can people get in touch with you?
It's pretty simple. If you just go to heatherluby.com, you will actually find links directly there where you can find me on Facebook, you can find me on Twitter, you can find me on Instagram. I'm pretty easy to find on all of social media, but my website will take you directly to all of those links.
Excellent. And as always, you guys can find me at aarongansky.com. Follow my blog while you're there. Leave some comments. You can check out our YouTube channel. You can always find me on the Facebook and the Tweeters. And all of that good stuff. Again, for you audio listeners, stay tuned for the full version of Start with Goodbye, Stop with Hello by Eliza Rickman, and make sure that you stop off at elizarickman.com or elizarickman.bandcamp.com to purchase her music. As an independent artist, she could always use the help, and I always like to support independent artists. So, yeah, enjoy the song, and until next week, thank you all for listening, and good writing.